And thank you for joining me on today's show. We have another great show coming up for you today. I'm joined today by the Right Honourable Minister for the Department of Health and Social Care, Caroline Dinenage. Caroline, it's a pleasure to have you on my show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for asking me, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, thank you for coming on. I'm really pleased that you've made the time to come on, because obviously with your very busy schedule, you must be so busy. First of all, I just wanted to say to you, Caroline, I was really pleased to hear you recently in the Department for Parliamentary for showing the recent story, the very sad story around Oliver McGowan.
Yes.
And when I heard your speech in Parliament, you nearly brought me to tears, because you spoke so passionate about Oliver and the struggles which Paul has had and what she's gone through. No family should. I don't have children, so I can't say what I would feel like as a parent, because I don't have any children. So I honestly don't know what Paul has gone through and went through. But just thank you so much for speaking very open and honest about that.
Thank you. That means a lot to me, Kevin. I think it's a great pleasure to meet Paula, and I meet a number of. One of the greatest pleasures of my job, I suppose, is meeting people from various walks of life and different experiences. But I think probably those that impress me most and those that touch me most are family members, often mums, who've been through dreadful experiences, things that people shouldn't ever have to experience, and then rather than sort of shriveling up, they actually use that tragedy to try and make life better for other people. And they have so much of my respect, and it was a great pleasure to meet with Paula. And I suppose I particularly identified with her because I have a teenage son myself, although I don't think you have to have kids to sort of understand how it must have been for her and her family. But I particularly found it very emotional because you can put yourself in her shoes, and she's just incredible, the way that she is campaigning for this and trying to find some good out of the tragedy of what happened to Oliver.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So I just wanted to start off, Caroline, just talking a little bit about, as you've probably seen in the news recently, and it's becoming more apparent, and there seems to be more awareness around this. What is the government actually doing currently around better systems in place where people reside in these autism treatment units?
So I think, and I'm grateful for people like you who've really brought this to the attention of others, because I think it's so important, and often it's a kind of an issue that a lot of people don't understand until people bring it out into the open. I think it's really important that we work really hard to improve how we care and support people across the board, and of course people with autism. For me, I think it's all about making sure that the support is there in the community. In an ideal world, people wouldn't have to end up in hospital or in some form of residential setting. If the community provision was getting it right every single time, there would be far less people ending up, I think, so that's why we've been investing a lot of money, millions and millions of pounds, to try and get that facility there in the community. We don't always get it right, and sometimes we don't get the early intervention that people need to keep them feeling safe and keep them from ending up in crisis, and that's where people do end up in a residential setting. Now, sometimes no amount of early intervention would help. People will end up there, but we need to make sure that if people do need hospital treatment, it's for the minimum amount of time, and that treatment is high quality, and that people are back out into the community as quickly as possible. And while they are in residential units or in hospitals, we really need to minimise the amount of time that people are ever kept in a segregated condition or in seclusion, because clearly that is not cool at all. And so that's why we've asked the Care Quality Commission to do a review on that. We were all really disturbed by the case of Bethany, and I know you've spoken to her dad, and I know the Secretary of State's meeting with her dad soon, because cases like that, they're really heartbreaking, and we need to do everything we can to avoid them.
I think what I'm actually seeing recently, which has been being more apparent to me, what I've actually been seeing, I don't know if you've seen this, where a lot of parents have been approaching me as a campaigner because I've seen lots of children and adults being sectioned under the Section 2 and Section 3 of the Mental Health Act just because they've had a meltdown. Now, obviously, people with autism can have meltdowns. They can have anxiety attacks. They can have meltdowns. As we've seen today, I don't know, you probably not saw it today, but it was on a BBC Victoria programme this morning. They were covering PDA. And, lots of children on their parents were explaining that children with meltdowns, one parent in particular mentioned on air that she was really worried that she thought that her child may somehow be in prison in the next few years because of these meltdowns. So do you think as society that we shouldn't, but do you think is there a better way or maybe a different answer where people have meltdowns instead of putting sections on them to do something different?
Yeah, I think there is, and I also think that, sometimes meltdowns come from out of the blue, don't they? Sometimes just something, everything mounts up and people just can't cope anymore. But more often than not, there are triggers and things escalate to the point where somebody just can't cope anymore. And I think it's about identifying that and putting the right support in place in the community in a timely way so that people feel supported, and not just individuals but also their families and their loved ones and their carers feel supported, to stop it escalating to the point where things do get to crisis point, and then suddenly everybody's running around trying to sort it all out, and maybe in those cases steps are taken that we wouldn't want to see. So it's all about that, trying to, while recognising that there will always be occasions where things happen out of the blue, trying to get that early intervention and the prevention and the community support in place that will actually stop, where possible, those things escalate.
I think what's most upsetting for parents is that when people are being put into these ATUs, that they go into these seclusion rooms. And obviously I don't want to mention particular case stories here, but some people are being put in these seclusion places where they're in a room where they've got like a padded bed, or they've got like serving hatches, and I think government really needs to look at where people with autism are placed, and not to put them in seclusion, because at the end of the day they are people with disabilities, the people with autism, and they need that appropriate support and care. And I think it can be really not upsetting, but I think it can be really stressful for when somebody's being put into seclusion, especially if they've got autism, because they don't know what's going on, and they maybe can't interpret the world. You can see how it makes matters worse. You can see how it can actually escalate things and make people probably even more poorly than they were before, or make people more confused, or make people more angry, or make people more distressed, and that is 100% not what we should be doing, which is why we have asked the Care Quality Commission to look at the use of segregation and seclusion. But also, it is about making sure that people are in the right environment for them. And I've met one particular mum came to see me, and her son was in an ATU, and he got so thin, and he was literally pulling out his hair. He was in a really, really bad way. And then, they got him back out into a community residential setting, and he's just, and I've seen pictures of him now, and he's a happy lad, and he's put on weight, and he's smiling, and it's just like 100% different person, and it just shows you. So how did they get him out from seclusion into the community? How was that process?
Well, I think it was a gradual process, and it was all about the healthcare professionals and the family working together to deliver what's best for the individual, and that's what we should be doing in every instance. And actually, about the services all coming together to find a more appropriate place. But sometimes. That doesn't happen, and it should, in every case the individual should be at the centre of all the decision making, and we should try and make the services that wrap around them, I feel.
Yeah, we've got lots and lots of questions, but we can't answer all these questions today because of your time restraints. But we've got a few more questions, Caroline.
Sure.
My next question is, you've probably seen my petition, which I've been working on for the last 8 days. My hand is literally ready to fall off. I've ended up getting RSI in my hand now because
Oh
I'm just
no.
constant messaging and promoting the campaign. We nearly at 10,000 signatures within 8 days, which is absolutely fantastic. And I was just wondering, uh, would it be possible? Obviously, I know that petitions need 100,000 signatures to be debated in Parliament. I don't really want to spend 6 months typing and messaging constantly. I've been at this 14 hours a day, believe it or not,
Yeah, sure.
14 hours constant. And, I have other things to do, other campaigning work and, running my own charity as well. So I was just wondering, would it be possible to bring this to debate now in Parliament?
Okay, so first of all, I just want to say I massively agree with what you're doing. I think it's an amazing petition. Too many people with autism and with learning disabilities end up in as mental inpatients, not just in assessment and treatment units, when they should be able to live with the right support in the community. And that's really the heart of what we're trying to achieve through transforming care. So you're really right to bring this now. Whether it gets debated in Parliament isn't up to ministers to decide. It's not up to the government to decide. There's a petitions committee which is made up of backbench MPs, and they
Okay.
decide. So normally it has to reach 100,000. Having said that, they have allowed things to be debated before that point. So the petition on Paula McGowan's petition on mandatory training
Hmm.
for people with autism and learning disability wasn't debated. As you mentioned, I was the minister that was answering it, and that had around 50,000. So they can the petitions committee, if they decide, can bring things forward for debate earlier. And I would be be greatly honoured to be able to be the minister to be able to respond to your petition as well. It would be amazing. So hopefully, it's up to the petitions committee and not the government. So you need to go
Okay.
and shake your fist at, at those guys.
Right, okay, thanks for that. Thank you. So, obviously, we mentioned earlier the government are planning training around awareness for staff, as which you mentioned recently in your talk in Parliament. So, could you tell us a little bit about that, Caroline, about
Yeah,
the
so
mandatory
this
training?
came forward as part of the response to the learning from deaths review for people with learning disability, and I was just absolutely keen that we accepted all the recommendations from that review, and the recommendation was that all people who work in health and care, so not just health and care professionals, not just medical professionals, but everybody who might come into contact with patients, so people who work on reception, maybe porters, everybody has some level of training. And clearly, I think the more of a sort of medical professional you are, you probably need greater training, but
Mm.
everybody should have some. And I decided that I wanted it not just for people with learning disabilities, but also people with autism, because I
Hmm.
think that's really important as well. And sometimes the two get conflated, and we know that there are people who have learning disability and autism, but then there are others who have very much one or the other. So I think that they're two very separate pieces of training that need to be delivered. And so we're going to be consulting. We're going to start consulting on this in January. And people say, "Oh, why are you consulting? Why don't the government just do it?" But I think it's so important that this training is right. If we're going to do it, we have to get it right, and that's why we need to ask service users. We need to use experts by experience, if you like, and their families and their carers, so we can get this training spot on. We're including people like Paula McGowan, who has been campaigning so strongly on this, to make sure we're getting it right. It's a short consultation because I don't want it to be kicked into the long grass. So it will be
Mm.
concluded by Easter time, so that we can take forward the recommendations and really begin to make a difference.
I think it's really important because I'm 44 now, living with autism, and I've got an identical twin brother who's non-verbal and he's autistic, and obviously we're the same age because we're identical. But I remember years and years ago, my mum, I'm talking, probably like 30 years ago, my mum took my twin to hospital because he had lots of problems. He basically had tonsillitis, his tonsils needed to come out, and went to see the consultant. The consultant said, "I'm sorry, but I can't deal with this. You know, I,
No, and
I
it's terrible.
I can't do the operation because of the way my twin was at that time." But I think we have come a long way since then, and I think things have moved forward, which is good.
Yeah, I agree. But why, as a professional who works in health or care, whether you're a medical professional or not, why wouldn't you want to be able to better be able to communicate and understand the needs of your patient group and your clients, if you like? I didn't know you were a twin. We have twins in my family. My brother and
Right.
sister are twins as well.
Yeah, identical
Yeah.
twin. I
Yeah.
come 5 minutes before my twin. So yeah, he's in residential at the moment, and he's
Oh,
been there for about uh, probably about 20 years now, and he's doing really well. He doesn't understand because I'm at one end of the spectrum and he's completely
yeah.
at the other end of the spectrum, so he's non-verbal. So he does have these challenges and things like that, but it has been really hard,
Yeah.
for the family,
Mm.
that's why I made a film a few years ago, Twin Brothers Worlds Apart, which is out now because it shows the misconceptions of people in the 80s growing up, a family in the early 80s growing up and not being understood, the
Yes.
misconceptions around autism. So the next question, Caroline, is or do you know anything about this, or if you can enlighten me on this, do you know if there will be a care pathway for people with autism? Because I think it's a really important question, this one is, because we have care pathways for things like diabetes, cancer, things like that. Do you think there will ever be a care pathway for people with autism?
Okay, so this is, I did have to ask about this. I have had to make some inquiries about this myself because I didn't fully understand it. But so there is a form of care pathway out there at the moment, but it's not articulated, it's not written down anywhere, and it's not in a sort of coherent structure. So what we are doing at the moment is developing guidance on autism, and it comes with a accompanying toolkit. And this is going to be available from spring of next year, from 2019, and it's for all local health and care commissioners. And the point of this is it will bring together all these existing guidelines and standards and best practice examples that we have at the moment, and along with a sort of a pathway, a sort of guide pathway that you're referring to promote things like timely diagnosis, effective post-diagnostic support, and all the other things that people care about, all in one place. So we're hoping that this will, effectively work in the form of a pathway.
Brilliant, because I think that's a long time coming, because lots of parents and even people with autism have said, why is there care pathways for diabetes and cancer, but there's no care pathway for people with autism?
Yeah, so it's cool. It's going to be called a guidance and a toolkit, but I think it's largely going to have very much the same effect as people are looking for.
Okay, and my last question, because I know you're really busy. People with autism have tried to access a personal health budget, and many have been refused because they do not have NHS continuing healthcare. Is the government looking into this?
Yeah, so this is really good news. I think personal care budgets are brilliant. I've met some amazing people whose lives have just been transformed. There's a fabulous woman called Debs, who I don't know if you've seen online. She's got she's on Twitter as, I think, the Debs Effect, and she had some really complex needs and some mental health issues that basically kept her bedbound. Her kids were her carers, and she was told by the NHS that she'd never work again, and she was given access to her health budget, and she took an art course, and with this art course she has now sold over 200 paintings worldwide. Wow. She now runs courses for the local NHS trust that told her she would never work again. And her kids, who had been her carers, have now all been through university and gone on to be successful in their own right. She's like a shining example of how people, once they're given control of their own budgets, can deliver what they themselves need to make themselves to give themselves the best possible chance of living a full and excellent life. And she's a real star. But I've met loads like that, and so that's why we've recently consulted on potentially extending the legal right to a personal health budget to much more groups of people that we think could benefit, and that includes people with learning disabilities, it includes people with autism, people with sort of ongoing NHS care.
So when does that come into effect? Because at the moment it's only for people who've got continuing healthcare.
Yeah, so we've consulted in this previous year, and very shortly we'll be setting out our response to that consultation. So watch this space.
Mm-hmm. Caroline, thank you so much for joining me today on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you on, and thank you for sharing all the information and responding to my questions as well. And just thank you so much again.
Not at all. It's been an absolute pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you. Thanks, Caroline. Have a great day.
Bye-bye. You too.
Bye. 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 Bye.